They called me the nanny. Not to my face, of course. That would have been too honest, too direct. Instead, they said it with smiles, with introductions, with the kind of polished cruelty that only old money can afford. It happened at the gala, the Whitmore Foundation's annual fundraiser, my ex-husband's family's pride and joy. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and champagne flutes, every corner dripping in wealth and legacy. Waiters floated by with trays of caviar, the string quartets playing something elegant and forgettable. I wasn't supposed to be there. Not really. I was invited as a courtesy, a formality, because I still shared custody of the little girl they paraded around like a trophy. My daughter. My blood. My heart. She was wearing a pale blue dress that matched her eyes, the one I'd sewn myself because she'd asked for something that twirls. And she twirled all right, right into the arms of her grandmother, who introduced her to a group of donors as our darling, raised by the best nannies money can buy. I froze. I was standing just a few feet away, holding her coat, her water bottle, her emergency allergy meds. I was the one who stayed up with her through fevers, who taught her to read, who held her when she cried about the divorce. But in that moment, I was invisible, a shadow, a helper, a nanny. I didn't say anything. Not then. I just smiled, nodded, and walked away. But inside, something cracked. Something deep. Something that had been holding me together for years. Because this wasn't the first time they'd tried to erase me. It was just the most public. I found a quiet corner near the back of the ballroom and sat down, my hands trembling. The music swelled, laughter echoed, and I watched as my daughter danced with her cousins, her joy ringing out like bells. She didn't know. She didn't understand what they were doing. She was 6. She thought everyone who smiled was kind. I used to think that too. My ex-husband, Carter, was charming in the way that made you ignore red flags. He came from a family that believed in legacy, in appearances, in bloodlines. When we met, I was a scholarship student at Columbia, studying design. He was the heir to a real estate empire, slumming it in the arts for perspective. We fell fast. Married young. Had our daughter before I turned 23. And then the unraveling began. It started with small things. His mother correcting my grammar at dinner parties. His father asking if I'd ever considered finishing school. Carter never defended me. He'd just smile and say, "They mean well." When our daughter was born, I thought things would change. I thought motherhood would earn me a seat at the table. But instead, they tightened their grip, hired nannies without asking, scheduled playdates with children I'd never met, told me how to dress, how to speak, how to parent. And when the marriage ended, they made it clear they weren't losing their granddaughter. They were losing me. The custody battle was brutal. They had lawyers. I had receipts. I won joint custody, but they won the narrative. In their circles, I was the unstable ex, the girl from nowhere, the one who got lucky and couldn't hold on. And now, at this gala, they'd erased me completely. I stared at my reflection in the window. Coral dress, simple makeup, tired eyes. I didn't look like them. I didn't sound like them. But I was her mother. And I was done pretending that didn't matter. I stood up and walked back into the crowd. My daughter spotted me and ran over, arms wide. "Mommy," she squealed, throwing herself into my arms. And just like that, the room shifted. People turned, watched, whispered. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "You ready to go?" She nodded, her curls bouncing. I wrapped her coat around her shoulders and turned toward the exit. That's when Carter's mother stepped in front of me. "Leaving already?" she asked, voice syrupy sweet. "Yes," I said calmly. "It's been a long day." She glanced at my daughter, then back at me. "You know, she's really thriving with us. You should be proud." I smiled. "I am. She's extraordinary." "Well," she said, leaning in, "don't worry. We'll make sure she has everything she needs. You've done your part." I didn't respond. I just looked her in the eye and said, "You've mistaken me for someone temporary. I'm not." Then I walked out, my daughter's hand in mine, the cold night air wrapping around us like armor. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I opened my laptop and started documenting everything. Every school form that listed someone else as guardian. Every email that excluded me from decisions. Every moment they tried to rewrite my role. Because I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to reclaim my story. And this time, I wasn't going to let them write me out of it. I didn't grow up dreaming of wealth. I grew up dreaming of safety. My mother worked 2 jobs and still came home smiling. She smelled of diner coffee and laundry detergent. Her hands always rough but steady when she tucked me in at night. My father left when I was 8, and we never heard from him again. But my mom made sure I never felt the hole he left. She taught me how to stretch a dollar, how to stand up straight, and how to never let anyone make me feel small. I carried that with me into adulthood, until I met Carter. He was everything I wasn't used to. Charming, polished, magnetic. He made me feel seen in a way that felt intoxicating. We met at a gallery opening in Brooklyn. I was working part-time as a design assistant, barely making rent, my shoes scuffed from the subway. He was consulting for his family's real estate firm, which I later learned meant showing up to meetings and nodding while other people did the work. But I didn't care. He listened. He laughed at my jokes. He said I was brilliant. We got married after a year. His parents didn't attend the wedding. They said it was too last minute and untraditional. What they meant was, I wasn't one of them. Still, I thought I could win them over. I baked pies for holidays. I memorized the names of their friends. I wore the dresses Carter's mother sent me, even when they weren't my style. I smiled through the backhanded compliments and the subtle digs. When I got pregnant, I thought, this will change everything. And for a while it did. Carter was attentive. He read baby books out loud in bed. He painted the nursery himself, splattering blue paint on his khakis and laughing like a boy. His parents sent gifts, expensive ones, and even hosted a baby shower at their estate in Connecticut. I thought maybe, just maybe, I was finally being accepted. But after our daughter was born, the mask slipped. They hired a night nurse without asking. They criticized how I held her, how I fed her, how I dressed her. "She'll never fit in if she looks like that," Carter's mother once said, wrinkling her nose at a onesie with cartoon dinosaurs. Carter stopped defending me. He started echoing them. "They just want what's best," he'd say. Don't be so sensitive. I began to feel like a guest in my own life, like I was always auditioning for a role I'd never be cast in. Still, I stayed. For my daughter. She was my anchor, my reason, my light. She had Carter's eyes but my smile. She loved bedtime stories and hated peas. She called me Mama in a voice so sweet it made my chest ache. But even she wasn't immune to their influence. They bought her designer clothes, took her to private clubs, enrolled her in etiquette classes before she could spell the word. And slowly, they began to rewrite the story. They told people she was a Whitmore through and through. They introduced me as Layla, never her mother. They corrected her when she called me Mama in public, saying, "Use your inside voice, darling." When Carter and I divorced, they fought for shared custody, not because they wanted to co-parent, but because they wanted control. They had the money, the lawyers, the connections. I had a paper trail of text messages and a therapist's testimony that I wasn't unstable, just exhausted. The court gave us joint custody, but in practice, they had more time, more influence, more power. And I watched, helpless, as my daughter's world tilted further toward theirs. She started calling their house home. She started asking why I didn't have a driver, or a chef, or a pool. She started asking why I couldn't come to her school's Founders Day when the Whitmores were on the board and I wasn't even invited. I tried to explain, gently, age appropriately. But how do you tell a 6-year-old that love doesn't always come with chandeliers and chauffeurs? How do you explain that sometimes the people who tuck you in at night are the same ones who are trying to erase your mother? I started keeping a journal. Not for me, but for her. A record of everything. The nights we spent building blanket forts. The time she got the flu and only wanted me. The way she'd whisper, "You're my favorite person," when she thought I was asleep. I needed her to know, in case they ever convinced her otherwise. And then came the gala. The moment they said it out loud. The moment they stopped pretending. The moment they looked me in the eye and told me without saying the words, "You don't matter." But they were wrong. Because I did matter. And I was done letting them write my story. The gala was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my daughter's school. The secretary's voice was polite but firm, the kind of tone people use when they think they're just following protocol. "We just need to confirm the primary guardian on file." "Is this Mrs. Whitmore?" I froze. My grip on the phone tightened. "No," I said slowly. "I'm her mother, Layla Carter. I'm the guardian." There was a pause. Papers shuffled in the background. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter. Our records list Mrs. Whitmore as the primary contact. You're listed as secondary." Secondary. The word hit me harder than any insult ever had. It wasn't just a clerical error. It was a declaration. A rewriting of my place. I hung up and drove straight to the school, my pulse pounding in my ears. The receptionist handed me the file, and there it was in black and white. My ex-mother-in-law's name at the top, mine buried underneath like an afterthought. I marched into the principal's office, my hands shaking so badly the papers rattled. "This is wrong," I said, slapping the file on his desk. "I am her mother, not her grandmother, not her nanny. Me." He looked uncomfortable, tugging at his tie. "I understand, Miss Carter, but this was the paperwork we received from the Whitmore family. They assured us it was correct. Assured you? My voice cracked. Do you know what it feels like to be erased from your own child's life? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence told me everything they believed the Whitmores, not me. That night, I confronted Carter. He was waiting in his sleek apartment, sipping whiskey like he hadn't just stolen my identity. The city lights glowed behind him, cold and distant. Why is your mother listed as guardian? I demanded. He didn't even flinch. Because she's more reliable, Layla. You're emotional. You overreact. The school needs stability. I stared at him, stunned. Stability? I'm the one who packs her lunches. I'm the one who takes her to doctor's appointments. I'm the one who... You're the one who left. He cut in, his voice sharp as glass. You walked away from this marriage. Don't act like you're the victim. I felt the air leave my lungs. I didn't walk away. You pushed me out. You and your family made it impossible to stay. He shrugged, as if the truth didn't matter. Look, Layla, this is bigger than you. My family has resources, connections. We can give her a life you never could. Why fight it? Why fight it? Because she was mine. Because I carried her for 9 months. Because I sang to her before she was born. Because I was the one she called for in the middle of the night. I left his apartment shaking, my chest tight with rage, the city air biting at my skin as if to remind me I was still alive, still fighting. That weekend, when I picked up my daughter, she was quiet in the back seat. Her little hands twisted the hem of her dress, her eyes fixed on the window. Finally, she asked, Mommy, why does Grandma say I live with her? Why does she tell people you just help out? My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry, but I forced myself to stay calm. Sweetheart, I said softly, you live with both of us. And I'm not just helping. I'm your mom, always. She nodded, but I could see the confusion in her eyes, the doubt, the seed they had planted. That seed terrified me more than anything. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the apartment. I wrote down everything, the school records, the phone call, Carter's words. I printed emails where they'd excluded me from decisions. I saved text messages where his mother referred to me as the nanny. Because this wasn't just cruelty anymore. This was erasure, and erasure was war. I stared at the growing pile of evidence, my pen digging into the page so hard it nearly tore. For years I had been reacting, swallowing insults, smiling through humiliation, trying to prove myself worthy of a seat at their table. But this was different. This was my daughter. And if they thought they could rewrite my story, they were about to learn the truth. I was done being silent. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, surrounded by stacks of papers, school forms, emails, text messages, every piece of evidence I could find that showed how they were trying to erase me. I highlighted, printed, and filed everything into a binder. My hands shook as I worked, but not from fear, from focus. Because this wasn't just about pride anymore. This was about survival. The next morning, I called a lawyer. A friend had recommended a family law clinic that offered free consultations. I half expected them to laugh at me, to tell me I was overreacting. But instead, the attorney leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice steady. The lawyer leaned forward. Her voice was calm. They're trying to make it look like they are the main guardians. If schools, doctors, and activities all list them first, they can argue you're not really there. Then they might try to get more custody. My stomach sank. Can they really do that? Not directly, she said. But they can keep you in court for a long time. They can waste your time and energy until you feel too tired to keep going. That's their plan. I thought of my daughter's face, the way she whispered mommy when she was scared. I couldn't give up. And don't confront them directly, she added. Let them think you're quiet. Meanwhile, we build your case. I left the office with a plan. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't drowning. But the Whitmores weren't about to make it easy. The following week, I arrived at my daughter's school for pickup. She ran into my arms, smiling, her curls bouncing, her backpack slipping off one shoulder. For a moment, the world felt normal. But before I could even buckle her into the car, Carter's mother appeared, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, like she'd been waiting for me. Layla, she said smoothly, we need to talk. I braced myself. About what? She glanced at my daughter, then lowered her voice, her perfume sharp in the air. About what's best for her. You know she thrives with us. She has stability, opportunity, a future. You can't give her that. I clenched my jaw. I give her love. I give her safety. I give her a mother. Her smile didn't falter. Love doesn't pay for private school. Safety doesn't buy influence. And as for being her mother, she let the words hang, sharp as glass. Children adapt. She'll be fine. I felt my chest tighten, but I refused to let her see me break. You can rewrite the paperwork. You can whisper lies, but you will never erase me. She knows who I am. For the first time, her mask slipped. Her eyes hardened. We'll see. That night, I tucked my daughter into bed and sat beside her until she fell asleep. Her small hand rested on mine, her breath even and soft. Then I opened my journal and wrote down every word of that conversation. I added it to the binder. Evidence. But the confrontation didn't end there. 2 days later, I got a call from my boss. His voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. Layla, I'm sorry, but we've had complaints. Someone's been saying you're unstable, that you're in the middle of a custody battle. Clients are nervous. My throat went dry. Who said that? He hesitated. Off the record? The Whitmores. I hung up and sat in silence, the weight of it pressing down on me like a stone. They weren't just trying to take my daughter, they were trying to destroy me. For a moment, I almost broke. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the binder, my reflection faint in the darkened window. My chest ached, my hands trembled. The thought crept in, what if they win? What if they take her from me? But then I heard a sound from the next room. My daughter, giggling in her sleep. A soft, innocent laugh that cut through the darkness like a lifeline. And I remembered why I was fighting. I wasn't just her mother. I was her shield. So I picked up my phone and called the lawyer again. My voice was steady this time. They've escalated, I said. Then so will we. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within a week, whispers started following me everywhere. At work, Colleagues avoided eye contact, their conversations cutting off when I walked into the break room. At my daughter's school, other parents gave me tight smiles, the kind that said they'd already chosen a side. Even at the grocery store, I overheard someone mutter under their breath, "That's the one who lost her kid to the Whitmores." Lost. As if I'd misplaced her. As if she wasn't still sleeping in my apartment every other week, curled up against me with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. The Whitmores were winning the narrative. They had money, influence, and a network of people who believed whatever they said. I had me, and a binder full of evidence no one wanted to look at. One night, after another long day of fighting shadows, I sat at the kitchen table with my daughter asleep in the next room. The apartment was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I pulled out the binder and flipped through the pages. School forms with my name crossed out. Emails where I was excluded from decisions. Texts where Carter's mother referred to me as the nanny. Each page was a wound, but together, they told a story. Not of weakness, not of failure, of survival. I realized then that I'd been carrying two kinds of grief. The grief of losing my marriage, my stability, the life I thought I'd built, and the grief of losing the family I'd hoped to have, one that accepted me, respected me, saw me. But maybe that family never existed. Maybe it was always an illusion. And maybe, just maybe, losing them wasn't the tragedy I thought it was, because what I still had was real. I had a daughter who looked at me like I was her whole world. I had the strength to keep fighting, even when the odds were stacked against me. I had the truth, and the truth was heavier than their lies. Still, the loneliness crept in. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet, I'd scroll through old photos. Family vacations, holidays, smiles that now felt staged, like masks we all wore to hide the fractures underneath. I'd wonder if I was being too harsh. If maybe, just maybe, I should have let them have their way. If it would have been easier to surrender, to let them raise her, to stop fighting. But then, I'd hear my daughter stir. I'd see her tiny hand reaching for me in the dark. And I'd remember, peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's surrender. And I was done surrendering. The reflection didn't make the pain disappear, but it gave it shape. I started journaling every night, pouring out the words I couldn't say to them. The anger, the grief, the hope. I wrote letters to my daughter, letters she wouldn't read for years. Letters that told her the truth, that I fought for her, that I never stopped being her mother, that love isn't measured in bank accounts or last names. Sometimes I cried so hard I could barely see the page. Other times I felt lighter, as if the act of writing was stitching me back together, one word at a time. One night I wrote a single sentence that stopped me cold. Maybe family isn't who claims you. Maybe it's who shows up. I stared at the words, my pen hovering above the page. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? Family wasn't Carter, who let his parents erase me. It wasn't his mother, who smiled while cutting me out of my daughter's life. It wasn't the people who whispered behind my back. Family was my daughter, who reached for me in the dark. Family was the neighbor who knocked on my door with soup when I was too tired to cook. Family was the coworker who slipped me a note that said, "Don't let them win." The fallout hurt. It cut deep. But in the reflection, I found something I hadn't expected: clarity. I didn't need to win them back. I didn't need to prove my worth. I didn't need to keep bleeding just to keep the peace. All I needed was to keep showing up for myself and for her. And yet, even as I found that clarity, I knew the storm wasn't over. Because people like the Whitmores don't just let go. They push, they twist, they escalate. And soon, I would learn just how far they were willing to go to drag me back into their story. The night after Carter's mother cornered me at school pickup, I sat at the kitchen table with my daughter asleep in the next room. The apartment was quiet, but my mind wasn't. For weeks, I had been reacting to whispers, to paperwork, to their lies. But as I stared at the binder of evidence I'd built, I realized something. I didn't have to react anymore. I could act. The next morning, I opened my laptop and pulled up everything I'd saved: the school forms, the emails, the texts where they called me the nanny, the voicemail from Carter telling me I should be grateful they're raising her right. I wasn't planning to post them online, not yet, but I wanted to see them all in one place, to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't making this up. And as I scrolled, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't scared. I was angry, but in a clean way, a focused way, the kind of anger that doesn't destroy you, the kind that builds you. That week, I started making changes. I called the school and demanded corrections to the records, citing legal custody agreements. I spoke to my lawyer again, who explained my rights in plain language, stripping away the fog of fear. I even reached out to a local support group for single parents, just to hear voices that understood. And slowly, the fear began to fade, because knowledge is power. And for the first time, I had both. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was at the pediatrician's office for my daughter's checkup when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Carter. "You've made your point, but you're embarrassing my family. Just step back and let us handle things. It's easier." I stared at the screen, my daughter cooing in my arms, and I felt a calm I hadn't felt in months. I typed back, "I don't owe you silence. I don't owe you surrender. I am her mother, and I'm not going anywhere." And then, for the first time, I blocked his number. That night, I sat down to write, not in my journal this time, but in a letter I planned to keep. It wasn't to Carter. It wasn't to his mother. It was to myself. "You are not dramatic. You are not unstable. You are not unfit. You are a mother. You are strong. You are enough." I taped it to the fridge, right where I'd see it every morning. Because the truth was, I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their version of family. I had my own. The redemption didn't come in one big moment. It came in small ones. Like the first time I laughed again, really laughed, when my daughter scrunched her nose in a way that looked exactly like mine. Like the day my neighbor knocked on my door with a bag of groceries and said, "You don't have to do this alone." Like the moment I realized I could pay my bills without Carter's help, without his family's approval, without anyone else's permission. Each moment was a brick. And together, They built something I hadn't had in years, a foundation. But the real reversal came when I stopped hiding. For weeks, I had been shrinking, afraid of what people thought, afraid of the whispers. But one night, I opened my social media and wrote a post. I didn't name names. I didn't air dirty laundry. I just told the truth. When my daughter was born, I was told I wasn't enough. Years later, they call me the nanny, but I am her mother, and I will never stop showing up for her. I hit post and closed the app, my hands shaking. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of comments. Not judgment, not shame. Support. Other mothers, other daughters, other people who had been through the same thing. Thank you for saying this. I thought I was the only one. You're right. Family is who shows up. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. Carter never responded to the post. Neither did his mother. But I didn't need them to, because the story wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. And in telling it, I had taken back something they could never steal again. My voice. That night, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, I whispered to her, "We're rewriting the story, baby. It doesn't end with them. It begins with us." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The court hearing was supposed to be routine, just another motion, another attempt by the Whitmores to chip away at my custody. But when I walked into that courtroom, binder in hand, something felt different. I wasn't trembling anymore. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't the woman who had once smiled through humiliation at a gala. I was steady. The Whitmores sat across from me, polished and perfect, their lawyer whispering in their ears. Carter avoided my eyes. His mother didn't. She stared at me like I was an intruder. But this time, I stared back. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from notes. I didn't stumble. I told the truth. I told the judge about the school records, the emails, the whispers. I told him about the night my daughter asked why Grandma said I was just helping out. I told him about the way they tried to erase me, not just from paperwork, but from her life. And then I said the words that had been burning in me for months. I am not the nanny. I am her mother, and I will never stop showing up for her. The courtroom went silent. Even their lawyers shifted uncomfortably. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Miss Carter, do you have documentation to support these claims?" I lifted the binder. Every page. For hours, we went through it all. The forms, the texts, the recordings. Piece by piece, the story unfolded. Not of a mother who was unstable or absent, but of a family so desperate for control that they tried to erase the one person who had always been there. By the end, the Whitmore's polished facade had cracked. Carter's mother's face was flushed with anger. Carter's jaw was tight. Their lawyer looked exhausted, flipping through papers that no longer worked in their favor. The judge's ruling didn't come that day, but when it did, 2 weeks later, I cried harder than I ever had in my life. Full custody. The words blurred on the page as tears spilled down my cheeks. My daughter was mine, not as property, not as possession, but as truth, because she had always been mine. When I told her, She didn't fully understand. She just wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "Does this mean I get to stay with you more?" I kissed her hair. "Yes, baby. It means you get to stay with me." That night, I tucked her into bed and sat beside her until she fell asleep. I watched her chest rise and fall, her tiny hand curled around her stuffed rabbit. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because the fight was over, but because I had won it on my terms. The Whitmores didn't stop trying. They filed appeals. They whispered to anyone who would listen. But it didn't matter anymore, because the truth was out, and the truth was louder than their lies. In the months that followed, I started something new, a small nonprofit for mothers fighting custody battles. We met in church basements, in coffee shops, in living rooms. We shared stories, strategies, survival tips, and every time I told my story, I saw the same look in their eyes: recognition, relief, hope. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough. Every voice that had been silenced. And slowly, I realized something. The Whitmores hadn't just given me pain. They'd given me purpose. One night, months later, I was tucking my daughter into bed when she looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Mommy," she whispered. "Yes, baby? You're my favorite person." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. "You're mine too." And in that moment, I knew no matter what they tried, no matter what they said, no matter how hard they fought, they could never take this from me. Because I wasn't the nanny. I was her mother. And I was done being silent.